early stages of our energy transition, we have found the energy sector generating jobs at twice the pace of the economy as a whole. So it's a way of saying that let's move on this clean energy agenda right now, because it'll also solve our short-term issues in terms of jobs. Now, what do? Well, first of all, we always start with energy efficiency. The power of energy efficiency is incredible. When John and I served together in the Obama administration, just the energy efficiency standards we put in place to 2030 would result in almost 3 billion tons less CO2, over $500 billion of energy savings for consumers. We also need to make sure that we can restore the energy efficiency standards for vehicles. Very, very important. Now, beyond that, electricity will lead the way to it is leading the way, and it will lead the way to low carbon. So the renewables that Bill mentioned are critical. Solving the storage problems for electricity for the long term, very, very important. These are all issues that we can really move out on quite smartly right now. And as I say, combine that with real benefit to the economy that is suffering so much today.
Fantastic. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll just be specific about an example of that. Electric car batteries are now improving very rapidly. Next year, there will be a new round of batteries coming out, and I'm told that Tesla, among other cars, will get something like 470 miles to a charge. The fact is, the vast majority of Americans don't drive, 200 miles, 250. They drive very, very few miles. Not everybody. I don't want to get criticized in pieces of, what about our rural areas? Yes, there are different challenges in different parts of the country, but most of America's urban workers never drive that kind of distance. So they could charge their cars. And when it comes to jobs, there are plenty of, you've got Toyota, and I mean, almost all the makers are now making cars in America. You've got BMW down in South Carolina. The person who's working on that BMW in South Carolina could be putting batteries in instead of an internal combustion engine. So the jobs are there. This is not a choice between the quality of life we have today and not today with coronavirus, but before coronavirus. We can improve our lifestyles, improve the quality of life, improve our health, and have terrific jobs that are well-paying at the same time.
So this is why I say to everybody, when people say to me, what can I do about climate change? It's vote. Vote. Voting is the main thing. These are policy things. If we continue to restrict or not allow cars to pump out carbon, then other technologies will emerge. And I can tell you firsthand, after you drive an electric car, you never want to go back to a gas-powered car. With respect, they kind of suck. Electric cars are just more fun. They're just nicer. And so what we will be able to do, in the same way we electrified North America, ran electricity everywhere, we'll create or build charging stations everywhere. And then we will develop cars with software that charge very quickly. And you'll be able to get wherever you want to go. This is people like to say a false premise or what have you. But the big thing is, if we all decided to do it, we could do it. And just look how nice it is to have clean air right now during this pandemic. Everybody prefers it. We can do this, everybody. Let's go. Let's get her done.
Thank you. I just want
to add that the question was for 2 or 3 years, but just to also, we should not take our eye off of the American secret sauce of innovation. We are going to need more breakthroughs, whether it's in hydrogen or in carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere, et cetera. But that's the other thing. We can never stop our innovation push to really reinvent the energy system clean.
By the way, in the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8,
yes,
refers to the progress of science and useful arts.
That's right.
It doesn't refer to let's suppress science. Oh, let's make our own opinion the same as science. That's not what it says.
Benjamin Franklin knew something.
Guys, wrote that.
I want to get to
the value.
I want to get to the third question. It's very important. I like this third question is interesting, and it pivots a little bit here. It's submitted from Linda from Michigan. What exactly can we do to clean the oceans? I'd love to hear what you have to say about that in this current.
Well, I've spent a lot of time on the oceans and started a series of international conferences on it. And I think everybody would be in agreement. The first thing we have to do is stop polluting the oceans. We have 500 dead zones in the oceans that come from the overload of nitrates that flow down from the Ohio, the Missouri River into the Mississippi and out. There's 500 of them around the world now. Nothing lives there. It's bereft of oxygen. 51% of the oxygen that we all breathe on Earth comes from the oceans. And scientists will tell you today that the ocean chemistry is changing faster than it has in 50 million years. And we have the ways of measuring these comparatives. The fact is that the ocean currents have even sped up now, about a 17% increase. That is something that scientists said would not happen until the end of the century. So everything is accelerated. And the other thing we can do besides not polluting is help guarantee that we enforce the laws with respect to plastics, disposal of plastic. We ought to get rid of the single-use plastic, obviously. There are a lot of kids in schools around our country who are taking that on as a major personal enterprise. And they've been successful in many communities in getting their boards of selectmen or their councils to ban this. So, we've got to care about the ocean is this incredible biosphere that has a remarkable ability to regenerate and fix itself in a sense, if it is not so overpolluted that it just never can catch up. That's what's happening today. The levels of pollution are there. You can see it, and also climate change. The acidity which goes into the ocean as a consequence of the quality of our air when it rains. We all knew about acid rain in the 1980s, but that the acidity of the ocean is changing so that if you measure clams, for instance, that are growing in high levels of acidity versus low, the lower acidity, the clams get bigger. The higher the acidity, the smaller the clams. And you see this progression as to each level of what they call pH in the ocean. So that's why you can't solve the problem of climate change without solving the challenges of the ocean, and you can't fix the challenge of the ocean without dealing with climate change. They go hand in hand.
Just to add a little bit.
Energy policy, yeah.
The ocean is about 30% more acidic now than it was after the Industrial Revolution, and this is wreaking havoc on the life in the oceans. They cannot form shells. For example, the coral reefs. You're in Australia, Kate. That's one place where the damage to the coral reefs is, and the ecosystems are enormous. There are a number of scientific approaches we need to research much more thoroughly to try to address the acidic imbalance in the oceans. It also starts, by the way, not in the deep water, but it also starts in the coastal waters. Things like mangrove forests. Basically, accelerating photosynthesis in the oceans could go a long way towards soaking up, if you like, some of that excess carbon dioxide, which is getting into the oceans from our emissions on land, mainly.
So many of you at home probably put a piece of chalk in the soft drink and watch the chalk dissolve, and this is what the dentist doesn't want you to drink soda, because that's this stuff called carbonic acid that forms when carbon dioxide mixes with water. But here's a problem, Mr. Secretary, I have for us. We have this tendency of Secretary of Energy, you and I perhaps, to preach to the choir, Kate, to tell people who are already on board with this concern. I want to figure out a way to reach people on what I'm thinking of as the other side, people who have been inoculated, or let's say brainwashed into thinking that everything's okay or things aren't nearly as bad as they are. I don't have it figured out.
I think that's a question for Kate.
Well, I don't know. It's something that I'm working on. One of the things that I'm personally obsessed with is people zeroing out their carbon emissions when they are traveling, when we do go back to traveling again, and actually how easy and accessible that is, and trying to bring everyday easy solutions to people, to everyday people. Just three things: single-use, eradicating single-use plastics. Zeroing out your miles when you fly. It's actually very accessible to do. I just want to interrupt really quickly and say a reminder to those who tuned in to ask questions, whatever channel you're watching on, because we are going to be taking live questions in just one moment. The other thing is we have one more question that's it's multifaceted here before we go to an intermission. Mike from Minnesota, what are the major plans for the electrical grid to handle non-polluting energy sources? And how is all this coordinated within the states? Which states and private industries are all for non-polluting energy sources? And what are the plans to retrain those who will lose their jobs in the polluting energy sector?
Quite a set of questions.
Take that one, fellas.
I'll start. In terms of the grid and the integration of renewables, in particular wind and solar, that are somewhat variable in their supply. Clearly, we heard earlier about the enormous advances in batteries. That will play an important role for up to several hours of storage. However, integrating much more smart technology will be very important. In the United States, getting very long distance, high voltage transmission lines built across states will be very important, because we have this huge spine of wind resource in the middle of the country, for example. We have to move it. We have enormous solar assets. We have to move them to big load centers. That's very important. But also, and the last thing I'll say on the grid is that we're going to have to solve some really big challenges in order to have wind and solar be the dominant resources, because we will need to have storage, not just for hours, but for days, weeks, months, and seasons. For example, we often forget a very elementary fact called latitude. In the United States, for example, you get twice as much sun in California in the summer as you do in the winter. So we're going to have to figure out a way of doing that. And I'll just say I'm fairly bullish personally on getting to a clean hydrogen economy to complement those renewables. But it's going to be it's going to be a complicated issue. But electricity, as I said earlier, is going to lead the way to net zero carbon. So we have to solve these problems.
People, keep in mind, electricity is magical, man. You can make toast or run this global podcast, web stream. It's just fantastic stuff. So when we talk about energy, in general, we're talking about electricity. And energy policy and climate change are intimately connected. It's all one big problem. But the longest journey starts with but a single step, people. Let's go.
Fantastic. We are going to take a brief intermission. We'll be right back with live questions. And I thank you again for tuning in. We'll be right back, so stick around.
There's nothing like a common cause to bring people together. It always has. In our country, that's who we are.
There's some interaction with the camera in my laptop, but now I'm using the...
Fighting for our values through World War I, World War II. Now we have the greatest reason we've ever had, folks, to come together. And we won't get it done if we don't come together, because there's a shared responsibility between nations in achieving this. So I think it actually could be something that unites the world. There are 2 billion people 15 years old to 25 in the world. And there's 1.8 billion children 15 years old and younger. 400 million of them won't ever go to school. There are places of abject poverty still. There are 1 billion people that don't have electricity still. You talk about a task that would unite the world and bring people together in common cause. This is it.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. We're thrilled to be talking to you. We hope you liked that video we just played. I made it myself. I did not make it myself. I sometimes lie. Just kidding. Let's see. We have a question here, some live questions that just came in. The first one is Donna from Facebook. How do we make renewable energy tech affordable for those not making a lot of money? Great question.
Well, if you've adopted a policy to achieve something with the vast benefits that we get from dealing with the climate crisis and the absolute necessity to be willing to invest. We do that for the military. We do that to protect ourselves in terms of our security as we visualize it in terms of war or potential war, terrorism, other things. People need to really focus in on the fact that we spent $265 billion of taxpayer money just to clean up after 3 recent storms, after Harvey, Maria, and Irma. And Irma had the first sustained winds of over 185 miles an hour for 24 hours. That was unique until Dorian came along. And so this damage, $265 billion, we didn't get anything except cleaning up. We didn't do the prevention. We didn't do the investment in the alternative. We didn't do what we could have done to reduce the problems of the coming crisis. Now, the scientists in the international community with the UN have told us, warned us 3 years ago. We had 12 years to try to do things that would avoid the worst damages, the biggest catastrophe of climate change. We're now at 9 years because nothing has happened over the last 3 years of serious consequence, and the administration pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which stalled other countries' commitment to doing the things they needed to do. So as of now, before coronavirus, every single major industrial nation in the world saw its emissions going up. This year, we're going up. We're going in the wrong direction, folks. So when Bill says, let's go, let's do it, never has it meant more than right now, because if we don't get going now, we're not going to meet that 9-year mark. And literally, catastrophic things begin to unfold. Food disruptions, more climate refugees than we already have, faster melting of the Greenland ice sheet. And so we've got to do exactly what we haven't done in Corona, which is take the warnings, which we've now been hearing for 30 years or so, take the warnings and do the things that rational people do when science is proven. And on that, Bill, what do you say to people who are the deniers, who just don't accept the science? You're a scientist. How do you manage that?
Well, I just first of all, go into it with not low expectations, but reasonable expectations with respect to time. The analogy I use is people who believe in astrology, people who believe that there's only 12 kinds of people in the world based on planets that were not observed until people had telescopes less than 100 years ago. The first time you point out that astrology is bunk, they deny it. No, this works for me, I'm sure of it. And you can do all sorts of little tests to show that astrology has no meaning. But it takes about 2 years. It takes people about 2 years of hearing the message over and over before they let go of it. This is my experience as a skeptic. I'm in both big skeptic organizations, So just go into it with the first time you tell somebody from the other side that what's happening is important and real, they're going to, in general, deny it. And what's been the problem, and Secretary Muniz, I'm sure you know this better than anybody, is the fossil fuel industry has worked really hard to introduce the idea of uncertainty, of doubt, that scientific uncertainty, 2%, plus or minus 2%, is somehow the same as plus or minus 100%. And that's not right. And so if you can point that out to people, that goes a long way to getting them to start coming around. But the whole idea where you just show it to them and expect them to get it is really, people just don't behave that way, at least not yet. But you guys, the coronavirus is a horrible, miserable problem. But wait until it's compounded with floods and hurricanes and all these other kooky things that are coming, because we've let especially the Gulf of Mexico get a little too warm. So these storms are driven by that heat, and they're going to be more pronounced. Not in exotic places like Houston and St. Louis. These are places that are going to be affected by storms while we have all this trouble with coronavirus. The sooner we get to work, the better. Everybody says that. And I just say again, everybody, vote. Whatever it is, vote. Go down the ballot, check it all. Just take the environment into account when you vote. And it's complicated. You've got judges, you've got school board members, you've got city officials that have to be voted for. Take your time and vote for them all with the environment in mind. Because built in is change. That's what's built into the U.S. system, or to all the liberal democracies around the world. If you didn't have the ability to change, whether it being a government system or an ecosystem, the system's going to go out of business. But that's not the way it is. Change is built in. We can do this, everybody.
Right. I think you make a really a critical point, Bill, about voting when you do voting down the ballot, that it's just as critical to vote for local officials as it is the big elections, and that's the only way we're really going to see real change. I just want to get to another live question that we had. Susan Noni from Twitter. Since we need stimulus to the economy right now, what about creating an infrastructure for electrification? Anybody want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. As I referred to earlier, I think the stimulus that we're going to need now really should have a significant clean energy component. And one reason is that, frankly, at least in my view, the rather rosy scenarios of a V-shaped, quick economic rebound are not, frankly, quite likely. We are going to be losing a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. I say that, meaning, therefore, we will need to create new jobs. As I said, there are many opportunities for doing that in the energy sphere. A couple of examples. Again, I'll go back to energy efficiency. The efficiency of residences, of small businesses, of public buildings are all very important. And the government could support those in a stimulus. But let's think about the opportunity right now in places like small business and public buildings, where certainly during the coronavirus, but even after we start getting back to more nearly normal activity, those are buildings that are not filled with people large parts of the day, in contrast to residences. In other words, we could be putting construction people in there right now, doing efficiency jobs. That's the way we have to think about this. Where are the places where we can skate to where the puck's going to be, a very low carbon energy economy? Start doing that right now, and start doing it, building the job base that we are going to be desperately looking for over the next couple of years.
Thank you so
much. And
much.
actually, if I may just add one footnote to the last question, I wanted to go. The question was about making the renewables affordable. Of course, we know that wind and solar, the costs have come down incredibly already. In fact, one of the real problems in the system overall, if you like, is that many of the traditional generation facilities, frankly, don't compete there. However, once wind and solar become very large parts of the system, we need a system view to go to zero carbon. Many don't like nuclear. I think the advanced nuclear technologies are very interesting. We need to address the capture of carbon out of facilities, out of the air as well. So we need to really have keep in mind, it's not about the one technology, it's about the carbon. So every tool we have at our disposal that gives us the options, the flexibility, the ability to have different solutions in different regions of our country and in different countries. We gotta throw everything at this problem and make sure we win.
Right. Thank you so much. Jessica from Facebook asked, what are World War Zero's top 3 priorities for 2020?
Well, our priority is to communicate like this to our fellow Americans. We want people who aren't normally part of the discussion to come together. It's not often that people hear from the Secretary of Energy or a scientist or a military person, all of whom have vast experience in the public sector, who are trying to really link their experience and their concerns with the activism of a lot of young people in the country and a lot of other activists who know we have to do something. And what we're trying to do is change the conversation. We don't want people to be dismissive of it automatically because, oh, that's Democrat or that's Republican or whatever it is. We want people to listen to the experience. I mean, when Admiral Lee Gunn, for instance, is part of this effort, he used to be the director of policy and planning in the Pentagon. And the Pentagon had a major office to focus on the challenge of climate change. Right now in Norfolk, Virginia, which is the largest port we have for our Navy, we have major concerns about what the impacts already are of rising sea level and of climate change. The readiness of the Navy could be greatly affected by it, as well as the capacity of our Army to do things they used to do. So security is critical to this. Health is is critical. We spend $55 billion a year, every year, on children being hospitalized in America because of environmentally induced asthma. We could be doing much better in saving money and helping those children to be healthy if we clean up the pollution. And pollution is what climate change is. It's pollutants that go up in the air, CO2, methane, and so forth. So our focus is on trying to get people to stand back from the intensity of the politics and look at what they can do on a personal level. What can they do in their community? What can they do in their state? And what can they do globally and internationally to make a difference? But the bottom line, we want people to see this issue for the urgent choice it is for all of us as citizens in the freest country on the planet, where we have the ability to do what Bill Nye said, go and vote. We're about to celebrate Earth Day in 2 days. Earth Day was a moment where America woke up in 1970, voted out a bunch of people who were voting badly on the environment, and then passed the Clean Air Act, safe drinking water, marine mammal protection, coastal zone management, endangered species, and created America's Environmental Protection Agency. That's what we want to have happen here. That's the most
under a conservative president, under a conservative administration.
Correct. And what we hope to do here is have more than 10 million conversations like this with our fellow Americans, many of them on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. And we ask people actually to help us afford to do that by going to worldwarzero.com, contribute to these efforts so that we can carry this message and make this the important part of our democratic process that it ought to be.
So if there's no other lesson learned from coronavirus, the coronavirus pandemic, is we're all in this together. There's nobody who's excluded from this. Once this thing gets in your community, that enough people are getting infected that it's trouble, trouble, trouble. The same is true of the environment. There's nobody who doesn't live on Earth. And for people out there who say we're going to go live on Mars, no, you're not. It's a long way away, and there's nothing to drink, eat, or breathe. So this is it, you guys. The Earth is where we make our stand. So we're all in this together. Let's establish policies that can provide clean water, renewable electricity, and access to the internet for everybody. If we can raise the standard of living of women and girls, the world will be better for everyone. Women will have fewer kids. The kids they do have are better cared for and have more opportunities and start their own businesses, and everything is better. Let's go.
I love it, Bill. I love the way you're talking. I'm not going to lie to you. Okay, just really quickly, I want to pivot back to Secretary Moniz. Kat from Facebook asks, how might hydrogen help?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Today, the system is decarbonizing and operates by the electricity system by the interaction, really, of, there's, of course, a nuclear base, a lot of natural gas, a lot less coal going out, and a lot more renewables coming in. So the question is now, while natural gas has been one of the drivers to lower carbon by displacing coal, the reality is we can't get to net zero without addressing the carbon emissions from natural gas. Hydrogen could be, in some sense, the successor. So it acts like a fuel. It could be the long-term storage medium. It could solve, we've talked mainly here about electricity and decarbonizing there. We have to acknowledge that transportation and industry are tougher nuts to crack. Hydrogen could, like natural gas in a sense, be the solution much more broadly across the economy, complementing electricity. So the vision would be eventually perhaps you make hydrogen by electrolysis, splitting water. You split it with zero carbon electricity, and the zero carbon electricity and the zero carbon hydrogen, if you like, run the entire economy. Industry, transportation, electricity, and the like. So that's the vision. Right now, it's too expensive. Lots of issues to address. The storage problem itself for hydrogen, but there's lots of things going on here. And as Bill said earlier about a charging infrastructure for electricity, we could imagine in the near term. You had a question 2-3 years earlier. Well, let's call it 10 years. We could imagine really moving out and expanding that marketplace for hydrogen and starting to build that big infrastructure to complement the electricity sector.
Fantastic.
It's a different, more sophisticated type of battery, the hydrogen economy, where you liquefy hydrogen and store it. And, people might have this perception of hydrogen being dangerous. If you want something dangerous, get a tank full of gasoline. Man, oh man. And so we all got accustomed to handling gasoline safely. People don't smoke at gas stations, for example. And so this hydrogen idea has great promise. It just means being willing to make the change and try it. And it really is, I'm a mechanical engineer. You continually refer to me as a scientist. I'm scientifically minded, but the big problem is seals, keeping the hydrogen from leaking. But we can do this. We'll solve that problem. Come on, let's go. Everybody loved the space shuttle.
I could give you guys personally, I could give you like $5 towards the seal problem. I could $5 American dollars. So let's just think about that.
Bill, can I just add one point? Bill said liquefying hydrogen, which is one of the routes. But I'm saying there are multiple routes, including possibly carrying the hydrogen in a liquid and then taking it off when you want it. So there's so much to explore here. And the rewards are enormous if we can crack this problem.
Imagine hydrogen-powered airplanes.
Yeah.
We just wouldn't have this problem of air transportation.
In fact, what I think, Bill, what I would say is taking a little bit of a license in calling hydrogen a fuel, but we are going to need some kind of fuel. And it's got to be a low to no carbon fuel. This is one of the possibilities. There are others, potentially through biomass, et cetera. I'm kind of bullish on this one.
Okay, guys, I just want to ask you, or I don't actually, who is it? Sorry, let me just find it here. Holly from Facebook. How do we get the mainstream media to cover the climate emergency with the urgency they are covering the coronavirus? That's a good one. Any ideas, gentlemen?
So people blame the media for something or other. They're reporting on what people are interested in. So what we got to get is everybody to make this connection between the trouble we've had, the floods, the storms, the inability to get insurance in the city of Miami, not Miami Beach, where there's a lot of wealth, but in Miami, because your wheel wells of your car get salt water in them too many times a year and stuff rusts out. Those people are going to move. Where are they going to go? We want to connect this slow motion problem to everybody's urgent concern. And of course, it's going to happen faster and faster, these big storms and displaced populations. The sooner we get going, the better. But blaming or accusing or trying to get the media to do something that people who watch or consume media are unwilling to do is a tough nut to crack. However, here we are with World War Zero.
But you know, it's pretty hard in the early days of this health crisis. It's pretty hard to expect that you're going to have the same coverage. It was growing markedly. I think Ernie, you'd agree, and Bill, it had momentum. Yeah. And I got news for you. Mother Nature is going to make sure that we are listening. And it could be in very, very tough ways. So as this gets worse, we're going to see for instance, last year in Pakistan, in one city, it was 125 degrees in the summer. And people were just dying of the heat because you can't live in that. And as you see places, Africa, South Central Asia, and other places that are suffering the impacts, Mother Nature is going to send us a lot of signals, and the media is going to cover it. And people are ultimately, the challenge for all of us is we could see this coming, just as we could see coronavirus in December. There's certain things you could do to prevent or minimize the impacts. We're choosing not to do those things right now. And so it will, unfortunately, get worse in terms of what the warning signals and the calls to action are going to be. And the question is, can we prevent the worst from happening?
And people say,
go ahead.
You're being alarmist. Yeah, yes. Sounding the alarm. Yeah.
I certainly don't. I certainly don't have the answer on the media question. But what I think is important to note, in terms of trends, is that it wasn't that many years ago. Climate change was always talked about in terms of its impact on children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I think what's happening today is people are understanding it's about us. We are already feeling the impact. I love my children and grandchildren, and I want to address this problem for them. But frankly, we also need to address it for us because we are suffering enormous damages, which turn out to be incredible financial burdens as well, in addition to the suffering. And I might add, we also know that there is an inequality among who suffers the most. And so there are many, many imperatives here, including the moral one, for addressing these issues today.
Right. Well, we're seeing that play out right now, aren't we? The correlation between the climate and corona right now in present day. I do want to take, if we have time, I think, for one more question. This comes from Mads Interlude. How can I influence my high school to make them make greener choices?
That is a great question.
Isn't that a great question? I know.
Yeah. So I guess if you can, do an analysis of the economics. And the example I think of in cafeterias, or rather in high schools or schools, is in cafeterias where people are trying to decide whether to have washable dishware or disposable dishware. And at first it might seem like less trouble to have throwaway disposable dishware. And maybe it is a good choice if it's compostable. But if you had efficient dishwashing, maybe it'd be cheaper to have dishwashers. That's off the top of my head, person I don't know who's in high school. But if you could do that economic analysis, you might be able to show when to turn the lights out, when to leave them on, when to have people clean the floors, when to run the vacuum cleaners. Like there could be analysis of when your electricity is used, when your water is used, And what does it take to keep your school running? It's what the word everybody loves nowadays is infrastructure.
Yeah,
That's a great question, man. Well, man, that is cool.
All of you folks in high school have enormous power to make a difference. I mean, look at what Greta Thunberg and look at what young people are doing with Climate Strike and all the efforts around the world to get adults to behave like adults. So what you could do is get a group of your fellow students together, leaflet the entire school, ask the entire school to write a letter to your principal, to the school board, tell them you want to know what the energy audit of the building shows and whether or not it should be retrofitted, find out what kind of energy it's using, find out what about the buses. Tell them you don't want to ride on a bus that's an internal combustion engine bus. They ought to transition, get a target date for having an electric bus. Find out why you have any single-use plastic in the cafeteria and see if you can get them immediately. There are all kinds of new utensils, plates, straws, all these things are being produced to be recyclable. And so if you demand that in your school, a lot of schools are sleepy and they're not doing these kinds of things. So you got a lot of power.
And I would just add, and then take the message home as well.
Well, so I say all the time, if you want somebody to recycle, get their kids excited about recycling. The kid becomes, if I may, insufferable until the parent recycles. And when I was young, everybody, there was a big thing to get people to not smoke, to quit smoking. And I hassled my parents for years, and they quit. They quit. Just to tell you an anecdote, I got some cigarette loads that made the cigarettes explode. That's when they finally gave up. We can do this, you all. You have, students, you have tremendous power, and I know you hear this all the time. You are the future, and we say that because you really are. 5 years, 6 years goes by pretty quickly, and you are going to be running the show. So let's do this.
We can do it without munitions, maybe. But, I do like the exploding cigarettes. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Just to close this up, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much, secretaries and Bill. It's been fantastic. But I want to say, Secretary Kerry, let's start with you. How can everyone who's tuned in today help? Why should we? I think we've made it clear why we should be acting right now, but let's start with you, Secretary, and then I'd like to go to the rest of the group to answer. What can people who tuned in today, I will say this, that in New York City, where I live, people are starting to compost. Single-use plastics are being eradicated. The consumer has a lot of power. You just don't buy disposable straws and plastic forks and spoons. You start at home. But I'd love to hear from you, Secretary Kerry, first, and we'll go to the group.
You're right on target. It begins with your own choices and the things that you do. But we're not going to get there just with that. We've got to hold people in public office accountable. You can't act with impunity in 2020 being a climate denier in the United States Congress or in your legislature, wherever it is. We are a democracy, but democracy doesn't work on automatic pilot. You have to make it work. And so everybody's got to say, you know what? If this issue is as important as I believe it is, and it's going to threaten the planet, it's going to threaten what's left for my children and for our future if you're in school, you've just then got to say, I'm going to make sure that we're holding the politicians accountable. I'm going to make sure we make our democratic process work. And you do that voting. You do that by going to the polls. And look, in 2016, only 55.6% of our fellow Americans, those who were eligible to vote, came out to vote. 55.6%. I've been to places in the world as an election observer where people stand in line all day long in the hot sun with tanks and machine guns and the threat of bombs around them, and they vote. And they're so excited by it. We have to be excited by this prospect in our own nation. And I must say, you know what the youth turnout was in 2016 when it was 55% overall? 19%. That doesn't cut it. So everybody's got to realize if we do vote, we make a difference. We can win back our future. And people have got to be active in their streets and their communities in every way possible to choose to make certain everybody knows this is really a top tier issue and critical to our livelihood and to our future.
And if people say, what can I do about climate change? Talk about it. If we were talking about climate change the way we talk about the coronavirus or shortcomings in certain elected officials, if we talked about climate change the way we talked about these other things, we would be getting this done. So if you're a young person out there, please vote. And if you are not old enough to vote, make sure the people around you do vote. And encourage them strongly to consider climate change when they vote. Because we can do this if we just get to work.
Bill, I can see how you got to your parents.
Ernie. Man, I got their genes. It wasn't my fault. They raised me, doggone it.
I will first of all endorse what John and Bill have said. But then I want to go back to my favorite word that I said earlier, coalitions. The reality is we all have to figure out whatever groups we are part of. And that goes from environmental groups to energy businesses. It goes to labor. It goes to religious leaders. We just need every one of these groups coming together. Sure, a little bit of different ideas here and there, but finding the way forward, because I don't know how we pick up the pace that we need if we don't have everybody at least trying to move in the same direction. So I think that's a big issue. That's why, again, going right back to the beginning, the World War Zero concept of bringing together perhaps strange allies is so critical. And let's just try to figure out what everybody can do to help solve the problem and just put our shoulders to the wheel.
Right. Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you so much. And thank all of you who tuned in today for this. I just want to add as an addendum to what you all just said to wrap this up. You know, when I worked with Oceana and Jackie Savitz and them and we worked in a very bipartisan way. We had everyone across the board. We had military leaders, community leaders, real estate homeowners. It was a massive bipartisan effort to take the lower eastern seaboard off the shelf during the Obama administration for deep water drilling. And that concerted effort by community leaders and everybody from Delaware down to Florida, down to South Carolina, everyone unequivocally coming to say their piece and say why they cared so deeply about the issue. So if we do band together, we can get anything done. And I just loved hearing about American ingenuity and creativity and science and hope. So thank you very much, Bill Nye, the science guy, Secretary Ernie Moniz, Secretary John Kerry, for sharing your insights and expertise. What a delight. I do want to thank you. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Are we mentioning the session tomorrow with the governors, with Governor Kasich?
You know what? That's great. Will you please do that?
Well, tomorrow at 7 o'clock, I think we have Governor Kasich. I hope we're going to have Governor Schwarzenegger. And on Wednesday, I believe, hopeful we're going to have people we'll announce tomorrow. But I think we've got a good lineup of activists from around the country.
Yeah, we want you to keep tuning in, and we also need your activism and your voices now more than ever to fight climate change. Please enlist today. Go join us at worldwarzero.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks, Bill. Thank you.
Thanks, you all.
Thanks, Eric.